Cool. Hello, everybody. How's it going? Cool. We got our slides up. I'll let some people come in. Come to our talk. We're welcoming you. How's it going?
More people, the better.
Yeah. We're visiting from the U.S. This is my first time in London, so it's nice to see everyone here. Cool. Well, everyone's pretty much here, so I'll kick it off. I'm Jesse Harrelson.
And I'm Florian Harr.
And we're going to be presenting on Is Flutter the Coke Zero of the mobile world?
Let us explore together the world of the soft drinks and mobile development and see if we can have our cake and eat it too and avoid all the calories with it. And since Jesse already mentioned, thanks for having us. We try to make it British English as much as possible. If you find errors, you can keep them because we had a lot of issues like finding all the British English stuff in it, but it should be very confident otherwise than that.
Cool. So a little bit about Betterment, because they did sponsor us to come out here. And if you're interested, Betterment is hiring. We're a really cool company. We're US-based investment company. We have retirement accounts, IRAs. We're a 401k provider. We're a first-class Flutter company with over 100 engineers in the US. And we work on a really cool Flutter application that we're going to talk about a little bit today. And we're hiring, like I said before. So scan that QR code. We're going to leave it up for a little bit if you're interested in applying. And me and Florian are always more than happy to talk about Betterment and talk about our jobs there. So find us. We're happy to talk to you. Cool. Let's see. So a little bit about us. I'll let Florian go.
Yeah, so my name's Florian Harr. I've been a mobile developer, and I'm saying mobile developer because I'm originally an iOS developer and don't want to get hit up at an Android conference. Since 2008, but turned Flutter developer for a little while now. I'm a German-American engineer, saying German-American, originally born and raised in Germany, so I kind of know the EU a little bit and been in the US for 7 years now. If you have any questions after this talk, hit me up on Twitter. My Twitter handle is caffeineflow, and if you don't find my talk very interesting, I can always talk about dogs, as you can see in the picture, so if we don't have a topic like that, I'm happy to talk about that.
And I'm Jesse. I've been at Betterment for over 4 years. I used to write Ruby on Rails code, actually, and I just recently moved into mobile. So this is my first mobile conference, which is very exciting. So I'm learning a lot about mobile stuff. A fun fact about me is I run ultra marathons. That's a picture of me at the end of running 100 miles. I look surprisingly happy, but I was not happy. I was happy to be sitting down. I also like dogs. Happy to talk about dogs at any point. And you can find me on Twitter. That's my handle. Just yield.
All right, so everybody knows the pain of mobile development, native mobile development, where you have like two code bases, Android, iOS, and things come apart and get async, right? So what would you say if I would told you that there was an option where you could have like the cake, eat it too, and no sugar essentially, right? The Coke Zero option for mobile, where you have Coke, in this case, like you have Android and iOS apps, then you have a Coke without a sugar, right? Coke Zero, that in that case Flutter. And then you could have Coke with no sugar, no cola, and it's actually powered by Flutter, right? Let us introduce you into this world, and today we have like 3 different topics for you. If you're a beginner that hasn't been like working with Flutter yet, we want to show you how you can benefit from Flutter today. We've went on this journey a long time ago and like already migrated a lot of our code from our native apps into like a big code base where we basically have a huge percentage of code sharing, where we share all our code between iOS and Android. So we want to show the beginners today how you can benefit from that starting today. For the intermediary folks that like already like started using Flutter, have like tinkered with it a little bit, know what it is, but have issues bringing it to production, we want to show you guys like what steps we took to bring it to production, how we work with basically 300,000 monthly active users without having having major hitches. We want to show you how you can deal both with like the management side. Jesse's actually an manager and can tell you a little bit about the politics behind it and how you can actually bring this forward, while I'm an IC and can show you a little bit of the technical side of it. And for those of you where I would have caught myself into the non-believers about a year ago, right? I want to show you like if you might be fancy some Jetpack Compose, or if you're an iOS guy, SwiftUI, but you're a little bit scared of the beta tag on the Jetpack Compose stuff. Flutter has been doing similar things for a long time, and you can also do like a lot of the stuff that you can do in the declarative world in Flutter very nicely. So let us show you that if you're one of the non-believers, and then you can decide yourself after this talk. To kick us off, we made a little bit of an advertisement for you, and hopefully this works with audio. Huh?
Hi, me again. I'm the guy that served you your Coca-Cola. I can see you're enjoying it. Tastes great, right? I'm here to convince you that Coke Zero has the great Coke taste, but with zero sugar. Impossible? But what if I told you you were actually enjoying a Coke Zero right now?
Ta-da! See? Coca-Cola Zero. Great Coke taste. Zero sugar, 0 calories.
I know Florian's just an IC, but he's also a video editor now because he edited that in. So
Fancy programmer video editing skills. All right, since we are going to show you a lot of what we're doing today on a case study, what we went through the last 1.5 years, I wanted to show you what a Betterment app is a little bit. So if we look at the app, it is nothing like a game or anything like it. It's a JSON pretty printer, I would call it. Essentially, we have like JSON streams from REST APIs where we represent your accounts, your retirement accounts that you either have with us or with an external bank that you can link. It shows an aggregate view of your total savings, and then you can set several goals on it. We look at the second screenshot here. You have, for example, like your goal set for a vacation, and we show you like different investing strategies. Like I mentioned earlier, we do automated investing, so we have like a robo-advising as well as human advising, where we show you where we give you investment strategies, and based on your risk adversity, if you want to have like a higher risk or lower risk, and then we show you like if you're actually can reach your goal or not. And then we also have like connections to external accounts where we basically like aggregate and show like Betterment accounts as well as like accounts with other providers that make up your financial portfolio, so you can actually like save and plan for the future. And that's what the Betterment app is today. It's basically like most of it is Flutter, but it's been a long time since we've migrated, and so we're going to go on a case study, like a suitcase study, as you can see, right, about the Betterment app.
the puns don't get any better, so you're in for it with these. Cool. So I'll talk a little bit about Betterment case study. The way that I like to think about applications. I really like trees in particular. I like plants in particular. I like trees. Has anyone read the Overstory? No? Nobody? No one will get this reference. It's okay. But because it's a book about trees. But I like to imagine our application being like a tree, especially when you're starting to build an application. At the beginning, you kind of have a seed of the tree. Maybe it's one screen, the first screen that's the entry point to your application. And then it sprouts. You add a new feature onto it, and that you have a new little branch that has some new leaves. And think of those leaves as like the new features screens. And then it's growing. You're starting to add new features. That app grows in new directions until you have a pretty complex. That was a big jump, but sometimes it happens that way. You have a pretty complex network of features in your application with a bunch of branches. It's grown in this organic way, in its own unique way, and it has a bunch of screens and leaves branching off of it. If you even zoom out from there, in our case with Betterment, sometimes you have a whole forest of multiple trees. For our application, we just showed you the mobile application that had two code bases supporting it, which was an iOS code base and an Android code base. And we also had a web code base as well for the web application. So we kind of had this forest of many different trees and code bases that had grown in their own unique ways, but we still needed that like unified user experience for it. And once these trees have grown, it's hard to roll them back into another state to get this unified view that we want for this forest. So we had this kind of forest viewpoint 1.5 years ago with our Android, iOS, and web applications. They're pretty different. We wanted to do something to get them all back in order. This is when we started to evaluate other multiple cross-platform solutions, and we came across Flutter. This was us when we found Flutter. Has anyone seen Indiana Jones? Yes? Okay, good. That's good. Not the Overstory, but Indiana Jones. That's good. So if you've seen the scene, you know Indiana Jones, he wants to grab this treasure, but he doesn't grab it right away, right? He has a bag of sand, and he's like gauging how heavy the treasure is and kind of dumping out some sand and rejudging before he tries to do this swap, because it's on this like pedestal that will set off something when he grabs it. And, we, much like Indiana Jones, we didn't want to just blindly grab this thing, this new SDK, this shiny new SDK, and like run with it, because it poses some dangers. It's going to set off some changes like this, like a Rube Goldberg machine of consequences. And we want to ask ourselves, is the cost worth the benefit? I think we often do that in our jobs with new technologies. So what we wanted to do was some research and ask ourselves a few questions before we jumped into it. At this point, we connected with our friends at Very Good Ventures, VGV. A little bit about VGV, they built the very first commercial Flutter app, and they work with companies to build high-quality Flutter applications built for scale. And shout out to Jay Meyer, who's with VGV. He's doing a talk tomorrow about testing in Flutter and Dart that you should definitely check out. That'll be a good talk. But yeah, we had them as a resource, and it was super valuable in this decision-making process and beyond. But particularly, I wanted to share with you a graph that they made, which encapsulates a lot of the questions that we asked ourselves during this Flutter exploratory stage. Don't worry if you can't see this very well. We're going to jump into it right now. So at the beginning of the flowchart, we had an existing mobile app, and we were not delivering features as quickly as we liked. So yes, no, continued down the flow. At the top left corner, our iOS and Android apps they're fairly high quality, but not totally on par with each other. But that's close enough to follow down this path. And then as we move down, we're using pretty different architecture patterns on both platforms, iOS and Android, which led to a little bit of drift between feature parity and functionality, which might sound familiar to folks who have worked in like iOS and Android code bases. At this early stage, we did not have the team resources or interest to jump into a full rewrite, which makes sense. The team doesn't know much about this newfangled Flutter thing, and besides, we're already like under-resourced, and which kind of leads us to our own Indiana Jones, who was Sam Moore. He's a principal engineer at Betterment, and he helped us lead the Flutter investigation. And spoiler alert, the eventual full migration over to Flutter. So here's Sam. Let's give him an Indiana Jones hat, because he's our Indiana Jones guy. But here's the thing. Sam, he looks great in that hat. He's not Indiana Jones. And that's a good thing. I'll tell you why. So like Indiana Jones goes on an adventure to find this treasure. Before he does some technical research, right? Indiana Jones goes through old tomes and ancient books to research where the treasure's at, and like at some point he has to shine some light through a diamond, and it illuminates on a map where he needs to travel to. And sometimes writing code feels like that. You're like digging through these ancient documentation trying to figure out how something works. But Indiana Jones just does his research, and then he just goes for it and goes and gets that treasure. As an engineer, we do this all the time. We do a deep dive into a framework or an SDK. We do the research to see if there's viable options available to us. We emerge from that research, and then we say, okay, this thing works. I understand how it works. Let's go for it. And while that makes for a good movie, it doesn't make for a good team experience, especially with a change this big moving to Flutter. We don't often talk about the consensus building side of choosing a new technology or framework. It's one thing to build your own proof of concept, but it's a totally different game to build support within your team and with key stakeholders for that change. So at the end of that flow chart, we ended on this step, which was build a proof of concept and build support for rebuilding in Flutter. The key part that I'm going to focus on is building support, which just I think Sam and the entire mobile team did a really good job of doing, and did a better job than Indiana Jones. So here's an outline of how to build support. Right now I'm going to focus on the build a proof of concept, POC, but I'll jump into these other points a little bit later on. So with our proof of concept, we needed to prove that Flutter would suit our needs while illuminating what issues and complexities might arrive if we continued down this path. Again, we're kind of doing this research again. So here's a very basic flow chart of our mobile application. And this already is like pretty complex. It doesn't even include everything that our app does. So like, where do you even start exploring how Flutter would fit with this, right? So let's just simplify things. Let's take away all the words. Let's flip the chart on its side, and this kind of looks familiar, right? This looks like the tree that we were looking at a little bit earlier. And, we're not out here to change the whole forest right now. Let's just look at the single tree. Let's picture it as a tree, and let's find one branch that's isolated. So if we're looking at this tree, it looks like there might be a branch right here that's a little bit isolated. It's right before the node above it where it gets kind of more complex and branches out way more. This is actually our sign-up flow. And this is an isolated feature that we could possibly build out in Flutter right before our login flow where it branches out. And it seems pretty straightforward to bring this over as our proof of concept. So now that we've identified the best feature for Flutter proof of concept, we got to work. Check out this little blue bird. Does anyone know who the Flutter mascot is, what the Flutter mascot's name is? Someone, Dash. Yeah, it's Dash. So we picked a, what? Oh, it's Dart. Sorry. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, no, it's good. So we chose this little blue bird. So this is kind of how we did it. Again, following the tree metaphor. It's a tiny amount of work with this sign-up flow, but it revealed to us what we needed to build to integrate with Flutter. Just with this amount of work, we needed to establish a foundation of like cross-cutting features, including basic things like logging, error catching, native and embedded feature management stuff. And so our little POC grew a tiny bit here, but this was really helpful for us. So let's pause here. This is where you want to assess your proof of concept. You've built it. Is it technically a direction you want to head in? If so, then begin using that proof of concept as a tool to build consensus with the rest of your team and outside of engineering. Eventually, once support is fully built, you can start migrating over other impactful branches until you've got a full Flutter application, which we'll kind of get into more later. I'll circle back to the other building consensus points, which were engage with key stakeholders and provide engineers with resources. But while we're still talking about this proof of concept, I'll hand things off to Florian to chat a little bit about how he solved the technical challenges of this migration.
All right. So our case study is actually in the midterm exams, and we are talking a little bit about a whiteboarding time. Right, so what is this about? Like, how do you actually get your first Flutter feature into your app, and how do you actually like work with your native code? I'm gonna go through a little bit like how you can actually build up like an architecture on Flutter, and how you can connect it to whatever architecture you already have in your existing native code. So if we look at a sign-up flow again, you've identified this as your feature that you wanted to migrate as your very first feature on Flutter. So how do you go at actually like implementing it in Flutter if you have not worked with Flutter yet, or have very little knowledge of the architectures that are predominant on the Dart side or the Flutter side of things? So one of the things that you will come across very fast if you're looking into like how to implement a feature into Flutter is the coordinator or block pattern, where you essentially have a nav, a state, and a block object, right? And you have these objects that link out to your screens. It's a very dominant pattern in the Flutter community and in anywhere in the Google documentations that you find, where you find a library for the block pattern that I'm going to show you in a second, because it's very similar to what Jetpack Compose and Swift do with a reactive pattern where events are emitted, coming through the block, and then like going back to the state, and essentially like seen here in the screen. We have essentially a UI on the left-hand side that emits events going to your block, and the block stands for business logic component in this case, and then basically requests the data from the event where you handle the event in the block. The data gives you the response back, and the block again emits the state gives the state back to the UI. And that's what your block is. It's a very active pattern, and it's very helpful for you if you're building out your first Flutter feature, because everything works in widget and everything is essentially drawn on the screen. You don't think of screens as like one single screen anymore, but you think of it as an UI component. And when you have your UI component in itself, like a sign-up flow, for example, you have an email field where you type in the email address, then these have defined states, and just the field itself has a state, and then you bundle together your screen from those widgets. If we're looking at like an actual live example and how that looks like for us, then we have a navigation here, again the nav in the top left to show where we're at, and we have the navigation that goes to the coordinator and then eventually either goes to the presented navigation context or to the app navigator. Again, this is the navigation pattern, then the creator pattern where you go through your coordinators and actually have your coordinator as part of your navigation scheme where you can navigate between different widgets or different full screens then, right? And that is what essentially Google and the whole Flutter community recommends you when you start going at integrating like your branches or integrating your end leaf features, right? End leaf features, because everybody thinks of it as a tree, right? You have this big tree with a lot of like branches and a lot of leaves at the end, and you start migrating it from backward or from the outwards inwards, right? And so you can either integrate this per screen or per widget. As Android developers, you have a little bit of more like an option on what you're going to choose, because you can either integrate like a Flutter activity or a Flutter fragment. An activity would be the full screen, or a fragment would be like just a UI piece that you couldn't put into your existing fragment. And when you do that, there is the Add to App, which is a first-class integration from Flutter into existing projects, both in Android Studio or in Xcode. You automatically get the debugging and the hot reload for your Flutter component. Something that always bothered me as an iOS developer was like when like the web developers were very fast, because they could essentially, the language was just interpreted, and so like they could live debug things, live change things. You can do the same thing with Flutter, because Flutter actually like recognizes your code changes and live reloads it, because it's an engine running in the background that is essentially drawing on your screen. And so you have these debugging and hot reload features if you're even adding just like one component or one feature to your app, which is very nice. But the best part about this is like some of you, and we'll come to that point in a second, will probably be thinking like, then I have to like port over all my REST APIs, I have to port over all my communication channels, all these things. You don't. That's the nice part. So Flutter gives you also method channels, which we're going to talk about in the next slide, where you can communicate between your native code, your foundational code that is already existing and working and proven today, and the Flutter features. So you can exchange all these informations like authentication, any kind of REST APIs, or any kind of methods that you need from your native feature into your Flutter feature, and vice versa. So you wouldn't have to like migrate and write these things twice. And that's what I've been just talking about. If we look at the state here, right, like we have the Flutter app, which could be the client, and we have an iOS host or an Android host. And these have method channels and Flutter method channels, which is essentially like a channel between where the communication happens from native to Flutter and Flutter to native. And oftentimes, like you need something to actually like either call then a full feature from Flutter to native or native to Flutter called a feature. And in this case, from Flutter to native, we build a native feature manager, which is nothing else than a contract bringing our functions into the contract that we've already seen. That is the architectural block pattern. But here we're bringing all our native features, no matter how they are structured. It doesn't matter how like your architecture looks like on the native part. We're just giving them a formal enum, here the native feature, and then you give it a payload and an entry payload and an exit payload. And then you can call your native features from within Flutter. You can do the same thing towards Flutter, and then you like go back into the block pattern. So if we go that route, right, and we again look just as the tree less than an actual tree with like roots and whatnot, we look at a tree with leaves, and like the leaves are features here. Then if we start migrating everything, turning it blue, then you suddenly become like more and more of a foundational code. You can actually port over to Flutter to avoid the method channels if you wanted, or you could keep the branches in the native world if you wanted. And the more you go in, the more your tree turns blue, and you actually end up with a Flutter feature or a Flutter app. Sounds nice. Sounds like the ideal world, right? Why is not everybody moving to Flutter today? I mean, is this the real life or is it just fantasy? Personally, that's usually when like these conference talks catch up with me, and I'm like, well, I am developer number 150 in a long row of developers that all left because the previous architecture was shitty. And that's actually what happens oftentimes, right? You have like a huge dependency graph, 9,000 like nodes here, and then you have like this one big like activity or this one big view which takes everything and like has several thousand lines. Everybody knows you better don't touch this, and the moment it comes up in the daily stand-ups, who's going to take on refactoring this, suddenly everybody drops off the call because they have connectivity issues, right? That's actually like a real issue, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't do this, right? Like you can still migrate the end leaf features, and similar to a strangler tree where you have like these roots coming into like the tree as like initially as a parasite or as like a tree growing over another tree, you can start migrating those features to the block pattern in Flutter and can just start deprecating the old legacy code from this one big blob that is holding together your old code. So instead of having to refactor one by one by one by one and then like doing one big release that is super risky, you can start writing incrementally features in Flutter and share them between iOS and Android, and then drop the old legacy architecture one bit by one bit. And if you're like, you don't even need to delete it, you can just drop it by like no longer using it and calling the Flutter function, which will help you get rid of the legacy infrastructure that you have in place. If you do that, right, it still allows you to have like these end-leaf features migrated, like I said, these isolated features. But as the time goes on, like foundational work will come over. And your maximum time savings will be about 2 times if you're lucky, right? I still admit that there is some complexity to add with the Flutter stuff. But the more you go in, the bigger it gets. And we'll talk about it in a second. Because if we look back in our tree again, right, you might end up with having migrated all your end-leaf features. And you might have like migrated everything. But there's more to a tree than just like what we see from the outside. There's the underneath. And we have the same issue here. For example, our auth we currently work on migrating our auth system because it's not per se a feature that you call from Flutter, and it's not per se something that is just there, right? It's a foundational thing that goes in between, and that's where the method channel comes in, right? Like we currently use auth along both native and Flutter, and we provide an auth state as well as an auth token to both, and it's not really handled by the native feature manager, but it's handled by the data channel. So we have the stream, the auth token stream, from the block where whenever like a auth migration or any kind of like auth token happens, we get this on the stream and we can actually work on the state that we are getting on the stream. So even if you keep your roots or anything that you have in native that you know works good, you don't have to move everything over to Flutter. That's totally fine if you keep stuff like that in there. And once you do that, right, and you actually like free yourself from the old architecture but keep what you need, you actually unlock the unlimited time savings, essentially, where you can start to actually write once, deploy twice, and no longer have to think about that. You might still be thinking, wow, this will take a long time, and I have to refactor all of this. This will not be a side job I can do on the side and then go to my boss and be like, well, look at this POC. Where's my promotion? And are we moving to Flutter, right? But don't take it from me then. Take it from Jesse, who can help you how you can make it a little bit more delicate to your boss and how you can work on this incrementally. I actually forgot a slide. There we are. With what I just said is, like, if we're looking over it at a time rate, this is an incremental process where you go over time. And where you actually, like, if we look at our code base 2 years ago, or 1.5 years ago, and then we look incrementally at what we started out with our Kotlin and Java code and our Swift and Objective-C code, it went down over time. And over time, we decreased the amount of Kotlin code and the amount of Swift code linearly down, while the Dart code increased, right? And you would think that the Dart code would have to increase 2 times because you're writing for 2 platforms if you would have a little amount of code sharing. But we have such a high amount of code sharing that we have very little platform agnostic code, which is why you don't see that the blue line, the Dart line at the end, which is ending up at about like 60% right now, isn't actually growing exponentially as the loss goes on, right? So we actually have a lot of like shared code, which is what you usually want when you go across platform.
Nice. So yeah, speaking of time savings, let's jump back into building support. So I'll hit on these last 2 points that I talked about. We talked a little bit about building a proof of concept. Now let's focus a little bit on engaging with stakeholders, because again, you did the research portion that Florian talked about. You understand that this is working for you. How do you convince the rest of your team? Because you're not just working in isolation, you're probably working with a team. So there's 2 stakeholders you need to engage with. There's leadership and product. And again, I'm speaking from the perspective of working at Betterment, and I'm kind of just storytelling our experience. And the structure of your team may look very different. This is just kind of the advice that I would give based on our own experience. But the 2 stakeholders we had that we needed to engage with were like leadership and product, and then of course the rest of the engineers who would be working on it. So let's focus a little bit on leadership and product right now. You're in a tough spot. You need to illustrate the initial cost of migrating features to Flutter, and that cost is worth the benefits that your engineering team is going to see in the long run. So don't fall into the trap of only talking about faster feature development. Even though that is a really good point to bring up, and probably the first point you're going to bring up is that we can ship twice as fast at least. But at least for us, it was an opportunity to totally reinvent our mobile team and the way that the entire engineering org thinks about and interacts with mobile. For us at Betterment, the goal was to become mobile first. We threw that word around a lot, which is we're going to be mobile first, mobile first. We talked about this before we even were looking at Flutter, and the term was floating around. People were saying it, but it didn't really have teeth. Everyone was in the mobile team, we were well, yeah, we're mobile first, but we're not really feeling that. We still feel under-resourced because iOS and Android were kind of too isolated from each other in mobile, and they were still both strapped for resources and basically competing with each other for resources, and they couldn't properly advocate for themselves as mobile as a whole. Now, at this point, now that they're working together on Flutter specifically, it's become such a low lift, and this is for my team, it's become such a low lift for my mobile squad to build out similar variations, smaller variations on existing Flutter features, that we're able to work towards A/B testing new variations on mobile before we even build it out on web. Which is interesting for our company because in the past it used to be we would build out new features on web first, and then mobile's chasing behind trying to build out these features on mobile and catch up and reach feature parity. Now we're shipping features so fast that we're hey, let's just ship it on mobile first and actually get this mobile first mentality happening before we even build it out on web. So that was really exciting. That was a big shift from the old mobile world that we had before. Let's see here. Oh yeah, so we talked a little bit. I think those are some good points to bring up with product stakeholders to create this tide change of a mobile first culture. It's kind of like reinventing mobile, using that as a way to reinvent mobile within your company. With your other key stakeholders, those are your engineers, the other people who maybe weren't as involved with the proof of concept or are still working on feature work with iOS and Android code. You need to still talk to them about Flutter and help them understand the benefits of Flutter. So a good way to do that is to provide your engineers with resources. Make sure that interested engineers are involved in any spikes you're doing, white papers that you're writing about it. Make sure they're involved with the initial proof of concept and contributing code if they want to or reviewing your code. Be super public and transparent throughout the whole exploration stage. Our team was, and it helped the rest of the engineers feel more on board with the changes that were happening and answered a lot of questions that came up ahead of time. Also, find experts to provide advice. We worked with VGB, and we actually paused feature development in mobile to put on our own internal Flutter training course for all mobile engineers, and also for interested web engineers, which was a really cool team bonding moment because then web engineers got to understand mobile's problems and culture a lot better, which is a good team bonding moment. And that might sound scary to some people. How are you going to convince your boss to pause feature development on mobile to do an internal Flutter training course? You don't necessarily have to do this. The big thing is to let your engineers know that you have their back, you're providing them with resources. Yeah, that's a big thing there. So I'm going to that's what it looks like today. I'm going to hand it off to Florian to continue with what
All
we've
right,
learned.
so wrapping up in graduation time, what we learned and what our suitcase learned, right? So if we look at it from a higher perspective, the improved developer experience is there, right? As an iOS developer, Xcode is lucky, and I just wish Apple would take all the money that they're spending on the Xcode team and throw it at JetBrains to give us an Android Studio equivalent. That is really something that is a lot better under Flutter. Since you can use either Android Studio or VS Code to develop, it's a lot better in integration, and it's a lot better for you as an experience as a developer. But also, like I mentioned, you worked with the Flutter engine, it's drawn, right? So you have consistent unit and UI tests, which is not something that you have quite often in the mobile world. Because it's drawn and the engine is actually open, it's a lot more reliable on where you're getting in, where you have your entry points and how you can test these things, right? Continuous delivery, there are all-in-one solutions, right, available for CodeMagic, Bitrise, and AppCircle from Flutter itself, right, or the Google Foundation bringing in Flutter. And there's Fastlane support. Or if you want none of this, you can always integrate it into your existing project and just keep working with what you have if that's what's working for you. But what I want to give you walking out of this door in a couple of minutes is it's all about perspective, right? We are experts for the niche that is mobile, right? And if we look at it, like, it doesn't matter to the user actually how the pixels are drawn on the screen. They don't care what is the framework that you're using. And if we look at the ad again, like, look how happy these people are. They are super fucking happy, like, announcing that it's like, oh, Coke Zero, great, like, I can eat more popcorn because, like, I saved all these calories from Coke. And it's all across that, right? There's even a British example on how this is about perspective. And after Googling a while, I even found out that this is apparently William and not Harry. So even something learned right there. And some of you might know Peter Steinberger, right? Like, he's a famous guy in the mobile world because he created, like, many years ago, PSPDFKit. Very famous developer, very intelligent guy on Twitter too. And he had a discussion about, like, how React Native sucks. We can all agree, I guess, at some point that there's, like, ups and downs with React Native. But it's kind of funny, like, he has this long discussion on Twitter. It's a huge Twitter thread about, like, oh, well, React Native doesn't work like this, and you have all this dependency chain. And then they go like, oh, well, any app that is effectively a JSON pretty printer can be written well in React Native. The guy goes like, yeah, React Native friendly apps are good. And then he goes like, well, then again, most apps are pretty JSON pretty printers, right? And I think that's what the core of this is, what we're going to talk about, like, going out here. Jesse mentioned it, right? Like, in the chart that we have on top, there's a question asking like, oh, is your app AR, VR? If yes, then you shouldn't go with Flutter, right? Flutter isn't like an all-purpose tool, but if your app is one of the 99% apps on the App Store that is like a JSON pretty printer, then it might be a tool that is worth exploring. 1Password recently announced that they're using Electron for their V8 version of their desktop client, right? 1Password password manager on Mac. I'm sure a lot of people know it. And they got like quite a reaction on Twitter. There's this guy like that's been using like 1Password for 12 years, and he goes like, well, I've been using it for 12 years, gave it to all my family, I gave you so much business, and now because you're using Electron, without even having tested it, I am going to ditch the subscription. I'm going to make sure you're going to feel the pain for using Electron. There's this guy, which I think is even better. He's like, ooh, Electron. Well, at least I don't have any excuses left not to switch to Bitwarden now. Now, if we open the actual like dependency tree for Bitwarden, then there is Electron. And if we can read like the actual alphabet and read the first, I think, 7, 8, 9 words on the README, Bitwarden app is written using Electron and Angular. Well, you played yourself, guy. I mean, you literally went from Electron back to Electron. And this is my favorite, though. Like, the guy says, like, hey, I'm super excited and wanted to actually wait for the production release for V8 before I test it. But because I heard all of the negative feedback, I thought I'm going to give it myself a try. Look at how it works from a user perspective, and I'm actually using less memory, it has a nicer UX, and it's better integrated with browsers. Now, that's like kind of like opinions you have to find out for yourself, right? But if you can distract yourself or can abstract yourself from being a mobile expert and reach higher altitudes, maybe then we can see ourselves in as an industry less as like iOS versus Android and more as mobile, right? Because we all want mobile first worlds, right? Otherwise we would be at a C++ conference writing, I don't know, CAD software or something like that. And that's what it is, right? Flutter is a tool in your tool chest among many others. You don't pay a plumber and then tell him how he has to cut this like pipe square. You just assume he does it, and then it doesn't matter to you at the end of the day if how it works, as long as like the pipe that he laid isn't like actually leaking, right? And so that's what it is. Reaching higher altitudes, maybe abstracting yourself from the discussion which framework has the last 2% of performance, because that's usually not needed, especially if you end up shipping like a 200-300 megabyte big app for like a JSON pretty printer. But all of this wouldn't be complete if we wouldn't be also touching on the one point that probably a lot of you have in their mind, the native look and feel. What's about my Android persona? What's about my iOS persona? They're different. You can easily get this native look and feel of Flutter, and you can replicate it to like a very high level of degree where only experts will see the difference. But oftentimes that's also not needed. We had a very strong CI branding already in place, and we already migrated like iOS to material design in some parts. And so it wasn't as much of like an issue, and it also helped our design team to be more streamlined. I know that recently material design for iOS has been put into maintenance mode, so take it with a little bit like grain of salt if that is like where you want to go. But if you have like a strong CI branding that is already working, then this can work for you too. And all in all, this should only help you save time to avoid the repetitive stuff and focus on what ends up on the screen versus what's underneath.
Yeah, and speaking of unifying iOS and Android under the umbrella of mobile, just to create a product that just works well. The other side of that is unifying your whole engineering team. Like for us, it unified our web and mobile engineers in a big way, and it got our mobile engineers, because they were more siloed together, they had more power to advocate for themselves with leadership, product, and engineering, and we could work together to have a Fire mobile application. So the world's your oyster with Flutter. We're just happy to share our experience that we've had with Betterment and working in a lot of Flutter. So thank you so much for sitting in on our talk.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We hope you enjoyed the rest of the conference. We know we're already a little bit over time. Hearing the clapping in the back is kind of the noise that makes you go faster. There's a party tonight. If you have any questions, there are many good topics over a beer. As a German, I know the good beer, so I can help you guide that too. Other than that, if there's a question, we're happy to take them now or later in the hallways and during the conference.
Oh, also there is Chris Sells is going to be talking across the hall in Hopper about Flutter navigation at 4:30. So check that out. If you've been at Flutter Talks in here, that next talk is going to be across the hall in Hopper. Thanks again, everybody.